Previously on Samurai Joinery, we dry fitted the first timber truss and finally saw the vision start to take shape. After weeks of planning, cutting and assembly, it was the first real glimpse of what this ceiling could become. Now it's time for the finishing touches and the install. I started by joining the ridge beam with a half lap joint, figuring glue and screws would be enough to hold it together. But as you'll see later in the build, it wasn't the strongest way to go about it. I then started chopping out the mortises in the ridge beam to accept the king posts. The plan is to install a truss every 900mm across the ceiling, so each of these housings needed to be laid out and cut accurately before assembly could begin. Here I used a 1/2 inch router to cut a groove along the top of the bottom chord. This rebate will house the aluminium LED channel and strip lighting, which will eventually throw light up across the ceiling once the truss is installed. Once all the machining was finished, it was time to move into the detail work. Every component was then sanded back to 120 grit before I ran a chamfer along the edges to soften everything off and prepare it for finishing. For the finish, I decided to go with a black Japan stain. The idea is to create a contrast against the lighter ceiling lining so the trusses stand out as a feature rather than disappear into the background. It also ties into the Japanese inspired aesthetic I've been aiming for throughout the workshop. Once the stain had dried, I applied a protective polyurethane top coat to seal the timber and really bring out that grain. It's the same finish I used on the ceiling boards, which helps tie everything in together visually across the space. After the first coat dried, I gave everything a light sand with 240 grit to knock back any nibs and raise grain. Once it was smooth again, I came back with a second coat to seal it properly. Once the finish had cured, it was time to cut the LED channel and diffuser down to size. I did that quickly on the drop saw before moving on to the wiring, sticking down the LED strip and soldering the connections that would run concealed through the king post. Today, we're levelling up this ceiling. So this is a really exciting phase because this is the first time I'm going to be adding LED strip lights to our ceiling. We're going to fit them into our trusses, wire them up. Looking forward to seeing how the ceiling looks once all these lights are installed into our first truss. While working through the LED wiring, I ran into a bit of troubleshooting. The strip was coated in a clear resin layer, which made it hard to access the solder pads. So I carefully trimmed that coating back with a knife without damaging the pads, which gave me enough access to solder the wires and join the two strips together. Those will eventually run back to a driver, which I'm planning to conceal inside one of the columns with ventilation around it. To join the king post to the bottom cord, I used two 6mm dowels with glue to reinforce the connection and hold the truss together. At the time, it felt like a solid structural solution that made sense in my head. But as the build went on, it became clear that this was probably one of those details I could have thought through a little bit more. And as you'll see later in the video, it started to create a few problems. After a bit of persuading by hand, I managed to press the diffuser into the channel. It was a tight fit, but once it snapped into place and the lights were tested, the truss really started to come to life. With the lighting working, I could move on to assembling the angled struts, tying them back into the king post, using glue and 6mm dowels for reinforcement. This is the point where things started to go a little off the plan. A couple of unexpected issues came up here, but that's part of building, especially when it's your first time making something like this. Failure isn't always a bad thing. Most of the time it's just part of the learning process. As I hammered in the 6mm dowel, the king post split and blew out through the side, separating the joint completely. Looking back, it was likely caused by two things: a pre-drill hole that wasn't perfectly straight, and the fact that this section had already been weakened by the mortises cut into it. So it's definitely something I'll improve on in the next version. Thankfully it was fixable with glue and clamps, and after a bit of repair work I was able to get everything back on track. Sometimes when things feel like they're falling into chaos, the best thing you can do is stay calm and keep moving forward, no matter the damage. Alright, now it was time to finally lift the truss into place and light up those LEDs. Probably the moment I'd been looking forward to most since planning this build a couple of months ago. Seeing it overhead and ready to switch on felt like a huge milestone. But once again, the build had other plans. This was becoming a battle, a real samurai battle. As I started installing the ridge beam, I noticed it was fitting extremely tight against one of the props. While trying to shift it across slightly, the prop pushed against the ridge beam, and in a split second it let go completely, dropping and snapping clean in two right at the half lap joint. Looking back, that one was on me. I rushed that adjustment instead of taking a bit more care with it, and it exposed the weakest point in the whole assembly straight away. It also confirmed something I'd already started to suspect, that the lap joint itself needs redesigning. For the next version, I'll likely extend that lap joint further and introduce some additional reinforcement through that section. Frustrating in the moment, but another lesson learnt for the next build. But like I said earlier, when everything feels like it's falling apart around you, sometimes all you can do is keep moving forward. Battle like a samurai and keep going. And that's exactly what we did. Dad came over to give me a hand lifting the truss into place. And after all the setbacks, repairs and reworking, I finally got to see the moment I'd been looking forward to for months. The LEDs lit up across the ceiling for the first time, and suddenly the vision became real. There were definitely problems along the way, but we made it work, and with every setback came another lesson for the next one. So after all of that effort, we ran into a few problems, as you saw during the time lapse. But overall, I'm happy with the result. Aesthetically, it's what I wanted. The lights look nice when they were lit up. A few things I'll have to improve for the next one. That join just in the middle there, the king post join was far too weak, and I had several breakages which I repaired on the fly. That bottom join completely snapped where the king post meets the bottom chord there, and now I'm going to have to come up with some sort of solution where I can add some strength to that one. I'm thinking of a metal plate with a few bolts and joining front and back. So at least I've got something to work off for the next one, and hopefully the next one I can make a lot stronger, especially in that middle join. Despite all the setbacks on this samurai mission, we kept moving forward, no matter the damage. This build wasn't without its problems, but every challenge taught me something, and seeing the final result made it all worth it. There's definitely a few things that I'll improve on for the next truss, but that's all a part of the process. Now that this one's complete, it's time to shift gears in the Samurai Joinery journey. In the next episode, I'll be starting work on my first Torii console table prototype. If you'd like to follow along, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.